The morning began like any other, with the faint hum of routine, coffee brewing, distant traffic, the soft chatter of a radio. But at 6:37 a.m., every device in the city, televisions, radios, phones, crackled to life with a piercing emergency. Broadcast. A voice, strained and trembling, cut through the static. This is an emergency transmission from the National Department of Public Safety. Attention, this message contains no evacuation instructions. There are no safe places. The words hung in the air, heavy and wrong, as the broadcast continued. The sun was gone. Not dimmed, not obscured by clouds, but gone. In its place, the sky was a void, a featureless expanse, not dark, not shadowed, but an absence so complete. It seemed to swallow thought itself. Lila, a young woman in her cramped apartment, stood frozen by her window, clutching her phone. She had been scrolling through posts on X when the broadcast hijacked her screen. The sky outside was wrong. She squinted, expecting to see stars or clouds, but there was nothing, just a blankness that made her stomach churn. She glanced at her wall clock, its hands ticking steadily. But as she watched, the second hand jittered. Backward, then spun wildly, as if mocking the idea of time. Her phone buzzed, the screen flickering with the same message looping, "The sun has been removed." She dropped it, her hands trembling, as a sharp, metallic hum began to bore into her skull. It wasn't a sound from outside. It was inside her, pressing against her eardrums, a needle-like vibration that made her teeth ache. Across the city, others felt it too. In the nearby apartment, an old man named Victor clutched his head, the hum growing louder, like metal grinding inside his bones. He stumbled to his kitchen, hoping a glass of water would steady him, but the faucet sputtered, releasing a trickle of something viscous and red. He recoiled, his heart pounding as the hum became a chorus of whispers, unintelligible but insistent, like voices trapped in a collapsing machine. Outside, the streets were eerily silent. No birds, no wind, just the oppressive weight of that empty sky. Lila's neighbor, a wiry teenager named Marco, banged on her door, his voice frantic. "You hearing this? You seeing this?" he shouted. She opened the door and they stood together in the hallway, staring at the stairwell. At the far end, where a blank wall had always been, a door now stood. It was wooden, warped, with a rusted knob that seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing. Marco took a step toward it, curiosity overriding fear, but Lila grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum in her head. The door creaked open an inch on its own, revealing a sliver of something beyond. Not a room, not a street, but a twisting, fleshy corridor that glistened under no light. Marco gagged and they backed away, slamming Lila's door shut. By 7:30 a.m., the city was unraveling. Posts on X, flooded with shaky videos and panicked messages. "The sky is gone. My clock is melting. There's a door in my living room that wasn't there yesterday." One video, viewed thousands of times, showed a street where figures had appeared. They were tall, impossibly thin, their bodies like soaked cardboard, limbs bending at angles that defied anatomy. Their faces were the worst, skin stretched taut, mouths sliced into jagged grins that reached far beyond where ears should be. They didn't move like people. They shuffled, joints cracking audibly, and stopped at windows, staring inside with eyes that were too deep, too black, like holes punched through reality. Lila and Marco watched from her window, hearts pounding, as one of these things stood across the street. It didn't knock or speak, it just stared, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its grin widening until the skin split, oozing something dark and syrupy. "What the hell is that?" Marco whispered, his voice breaking. Lila didn't answer. She couldn't. The hum in her head was louder now, and her vision blurred, as if the creature's gaze was pulling something out of her. She yanked the curtains shut, her hands shaking so badly she tore the fabric. The broadcast updated at 8:01 a.m. The voice now hoarse, almost sobbing. "Do not approach the figures. Do not look at them for too long. They are not human." Reports flooded in of people who had gotten too close. A man in a nearby neighborhood had tried to confront one of the creatures, shouting at it to leave. Witnesses said his body began to change. His arms elongated, his fingers curling into spirals, his face collapsing into a wet, shapeless mass before he collapsed, motionless. Another video showed a woman touching one of the figures. Her skin bubbled and split, her screams turning to gurgles as her body folded inward, like paper crumpled by an unseen hand. Lila's apartment felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. The hum was unbearable, and she noticed something new. A faint scratching from her bathroom. She crept toward the door, Marco trailing behind, and pushed it open. The mirror above the sink was wrong. It didn't reflect the room. Instead, it showed her living room, but different. A chair was upside down, a shadow moved across the wall, though no one was there. The scratching grew louder, and something in the mirror's reflection shifted. A hand, too long, too thin, reaching out from the shadow. Lila slammed the door shut, her breath ragged. "We need to board it up," she said, her voice barely a whisper. As the morning stretched on, the city descended into chaos. People barricaded themselves in their homes, but the anomalies multiplied. Doors appeared in impossible places, on ceilings, in the middle of floors, leading to nowhere. Windows opened to vistas of writhing organic shapes that pulsed with no rhythm, and the figures outside grew bolder, their numbers swelling, their grins splitting wider. Lila and Marco huddled in her living room, the radio now silent, the hum in their heads drowning out everything else. They didn't know what was coming, but one thing was clear: the void wasn't just in the sky. It was here inside, and it was hungry. Lila and Marco sat in the dim glow of a single lamp, the curtains drawn tight to block out the empty sky. The hum in their heads had dulled to a persistent ache, but the air in the apartment felt thick, as if it were congealing around them. The radio, now silent after the last broadcast, sat on the coffee table like a dead thing. Lila's phone buzzed intermittently, its screen flickering with fragments of the emergency message: "Do not approach the figures. Do not look at them for too long." She shoved it under a cushion, unable to bear the distorted text that seemed to writhe like worms. Outside, the city was a graveyard of sound. No cars, no voices, just the occasional crack of something unnatural moving in the streets. The first sign of trouble came at 9:01 a.m. Lila noticed her reflection in the glass of a picture frame on the wall. It wasn't right. Her face was there, but her eyes were too wide, her mouth slightly off, as if someone had smudged her features with a damp cloth. She blinked, and the reflection didn't. Instead, it tilted its head, mimicking her movement, a fraction too late. "Marco," she whispered, her voice trembling. He turned, his face pale, and saw it too. The reflection began to change. A shadow flickered behind it, tall and thin, with a grin that split its face into jagged halves. Lila tore the frame from the wall and hurled it to the floor, the glass shattering into 1,000 glinting shards. Each shard reflected something different: a hallway with pulsating walls, a window showing a sky full of writhing shapes, a pair of eyes that weren't hers. The apartment's mirrors were worse. They had covered the bathroom mirror with a blanket. But now, every reflective surface, Marco's phone screen, the kitchen's stainless steel kettle, even the polished doorknobs, showed glimpses of places that shouldn't exist. Marco held up his phone. Its screen cracked from an earlier drop, and saw his bedroom, but wrong. The bed was upside down, the walls pulsed with veins, and a figure stood in the corner, its limbs folding into impossible angles. A voice, wet and guttural, whispered from the screen, calling his name. "Marco, Marco!" He screamed and threw the phone across the room, where it landed with a thud, the screen still glowing, the voice still calling. By 10:30 a.m., reports flooded X, though the platform was glitching, posts vanishing or rearranging into gibberish. A live stream from a nearby street showed a woman staring into a shop window, her reflection moving independently, its hands reaching through the glass. The stream cut off as her reflection's fingers wrapped around her throat, her real body convulsing before collapsing into a heap of twitching flesh. Another post described a man trapped in his bathroom, his mirror showing a version of himself that laughed while his real face screamed. Lila scrolled through the posts, her hands shaking, until her phone froze on an image. Her own apartment, seen from above, with a shadowy figure standing over her sleeping form. She hadn't taken that photo. The disappearances began soon after. Marco's younger sister, Elena, who lived in the apartment below, was the first to go. Marco had called her earlier, begging her to stay safe. But when he tried again, the line was dead. They raced downstairs, pounding on her door, but the apartment was empty. Elena's shoes were still by the door, her phone on the counter, its screen showing a frozen image of a room that wasn't hers, a room with walls that dripped like melting wax. Lila noticed a faint smell like rotting meat and found a circle on the living room wall, drawn in a sticky red-brown substance that pulsed faintly under her flashlight. Marco touched it, and it squelched, leaving a smear on his fingers that smelled of blood and rust. Back in Lila's apartment, the situation worsened. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched the hum in their heads. A scratching sound came from the kitchen, and they found the kettle vibrating, its surface reflecting a version of themselves, sitting at a table that didn't exist, eating something that writhed on their plates. Lila smashed the kettle with a frying pan, but the shards continued to reflect the scene, the figures in them turning to stare directly at her. "They know we're here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing hum. At 11 a.m., a new broadcast crackled through the radio, the voice now barely human, slurred and wet. "Avoid mirrors. Do not answer the phone. They are listening." The message cut off with a gurgle, replaced by a looping sound of static mixed with something like laughter. Lila and Marco tried to board up the windows, but the wood they used began to warp, sprouting fleshy tendrils that curled toward them. They retreated to the center of the living room, surrounded by furniture they'd pushed against the walls, their only weapons a kitchen knife and a hammer. The hum was deafening now, and Lila felt it crawling under her skin as if something were trying to rewrite her from the inside. The final blow came when Marco's phone rang, despite having no signal. The screen showed Elena's name, but the voice on the other end wasn't hers. It was a chorus of voices, overlapping, whispering his name in a cadence that made his eyes glaze over. Lila snatched the phone and threw it into the hallway, where it landed near the warped door they'd seen earlier. The door was open now, wider, and something was moving inside, a shape that was almost human, but too thin, too wrong, its limbs bending like reeds in a storm. It didn't step out. It just watched, its grin splitting its face, its eyes like twin voids. Lila slammed her apartment door shut, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would burst. "We can't stay here," she said. But Marco was staring at the floor, his face pale. "She's gone," he whispered, "and I'm next." Lila and Marco huddled in the center of her apartment, the air thick with the stench of rust and decay. The hum in their heads had become a relentless pulse, like a heartbeat from something vast and unseen. The walls, once solid, now seemed to ripple, as if the apartment itself were alive and struggling to contain whatever was seeping through its seams. The radio, silent since the last garbled broadcast, crackled faintly, but no voice came through, just a low, wet gurgle, like someone drowning in their own throat. Outside, the city was a void, the streets empty except for the shambling figures with their impossible grins, their numbers growing with each passing hour. By 11:27 a.m., the pattern of disappearances became undeniable. Marco, still shaken from the call that wasn't Elena, checked his phone despite Lila's protests. A post on X, one of the few still loading through the glitch-riddled platform, described a chilling trend. People were vanishing in reverse order of their births. The youngest in any household went first, followed by the next youngest, like a countdown carved into the fabric of reality. Marco, at 17, was younger than Lila by nearly a decade. His hands trembled as he read aloud a post from a woman claiming her toddler son had vanished while she blinked, leaving only his toy truck spinning on the floor. "It's happening everywhere," he whispered, his voice cracking. Lila's eyes darted to the corners of the room, where shadows seemed to pool unnaturally, thicker than they should be. They ventured downstairs again, desperate to find any sign of Elena or others. But the building was a tomb. Every apartment they checked was empty, the doors ajar, the air heavy with that same rotting meat smell. In one unit, they found another circle on the wall, larger than the one in Elena's apartment, its edges glistening with a substance that pulsed and twitched. Lila shone her flashlight on it, and the beam caught something embedded in the circle. A human tooth, yellowed and cracked, pressed into the fleshy mass. Marco gagged, backing away, but Lila noticed something worse. The circle was growing, its edges creeping outward like a living wound. She grabbed his arm, pulling him back to her apartment, her heart pounding with the certainty that time was running out. Back in the apartment, the anomalies escalated. The warped door in the hallway was now fully open, revealing a corridor that stretched impossibly far, its walls lined with pulsating, vein-like growths. A faint whisper echoed from within, not words, but a rhythmic chant that matched the hum in their heads. Lila slammed the door shut, but it rattled in its frame, as if something on the other side were pushing back. The furniture they'd used to barricade the windows began to shift, the wood splitting to reveal soft, pink flesh beneath, oozing a dark fluid that smelled of iron. Marco swung his hammer at a chair and it screamed, a high, keening wail that made his ears bleed. "This place isn't ours anymore," Lila said, her voice steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. The final broadcast came at noon, barely audible through the static. "Do not look at the sky. Do not say your name. They have won." The voice dissolved into a choking sound, then silence. Lila and Marco exchanged a glance, both understanding the unspoken truth. Whatever was happening, it was no longer confined to the world outside. The apartment was a trap, its walls closing in, its reality unraveling. Marco's eyes widened as he clutched his head, the hum now so loud he could barely speak. "I saw something," he gasped, pointing to a corner of the room. Lila followed his gaze, but there was nothing, just an empty space where the light seemed to bend inward like a hole in the air. "It was there," he insisted, his voice rising. "It was me, but wrong. It was smiling." Before Lila could respond, Marco froze, his eyes locked on that same empty corner. His body began to shake, his fingers curling into claws, his face contorting as if something were pulling it apart from within. "Lila," he whispered, his voice not his own, "it's calling me." She lunged for him, but he was gone. Not violently, not with a sound, just gone, as if the air had swallowed him whole. The hammer he'd been holding clattered to the floor, its handle now slick with that same dark fluid. Lila staggered back, her breath hitching, and noticed a new circle forming on her living room wall. It was small at first, but growing, its surface rippling with the same fleshy texture, embedded with fragments of bone and hair. She touched it, unable to stop herself, and felt it pulse under her fingers, warm and alive, whispering her name in a voice that wasn't human. Alone now, Lila backed away from the circle, her knife clutched tightly. The apartment was silent, but the silence was a lie. It pressed against her, heavy and alive, as if the void itself were watching. She glanced at the curtained window, tempted to look outside, to see if the sky was still that awful blankness. But the broadcast's warning echoed in her mind. The hum in her head was unbearable now, and she felt it changing her, rewriting her thoughts into something alien. The door to the hallway rattled again, and from the other side came a soft, deliberate knock. It wasn't Marco. It wasn't anyone. She gripped the knife, her eyes darting to the growing circle on the wall, and realized the truth. The void wasn't just outside, it was inside her, and it was almost done.